Is Rina. I'm from Birmingham International Academy at the University of Birmingham, and I'm here with Kevin Haines, who still just about works at the University of Groningen, but who will soon join the University of Bristol. We were talking just now, that since we started developing this presentation, our focus has shifted somewhat, grown sharper, we think, but anyway, so we'll be talking about how EAP connects with content in the international classroom and how maybe EAP tutors and content lecturers can work in partnership to promote the integration of intercultural and linguistic dimensions in teaching and learning.
And I'll be thinking about my perspective, which is coming from the point of view of international classrooms, English medium instruction, working in the Netherlands. Rina and I have been working together for some time, exchanging different perspectives, and I think it's a good example of the kind of collaborative partnerships that we're actually talking about building between different stakeholders with different backgrounds. We think that this is part of our CPD, our continuing professional development, and what I tend to think of as building beyond, that is getting beyond the daily business and thinking with other people about what we're doing and what kind of impact what we do has on our students. In particular, I'll be talking a little bit about EQUIP, which is a set of resources we developed through a European project, and which we think we could use to work together with content lecturers in partnerships. One of the things that I've noticed very strongly in my work is that language is there all the time in all the processes we deal with in English medium instruction classrooms. The problem is to try and work out what the position of language actually is and to try and make it more explicit in a way that we don't have to let the students join the dots together, but we do some of that work for them. Okay, well, Rina, you're going to speak a little bit more about what you're doing in Birmingham, I think.
Yeah, so as Kevin explained, our talk is set against the background of this increasing internationalization of higher education and student mobility, and also increasingly higher education is delivered through the medium of English, and that's not just in native speaking countries, but also many countries in Europe, for instance, offer master's degrees, sometimes in English only. And this means that a non-native speaking student has to demonstrate sufficient English language ability before they can join the English speaking university. And they show an IELTS score, or they do foundation year, a pre-sessional course, so that they are admitted to the English speaking university. And the idea is, if there's sufficient language ability, that will help towards achieving academic success. Once they're on the degree program, students can get in-sessional support also from the EAP tutor, which often comes on top of the normal workload. Most non-native speaking students don't have to do this. They don't have to do EAP courses. It sort of illustrates that the approach taken is a deficit approach, or as Carroll puts it rather strongly, the non-native speaking student gets the message, you have a problem, you are a problem maybe, and if we signal that problem, you need to go away and be fixed by the EAP tutor. So the non-native speaking students, they have to move up to native English language level. Also, they need to adjust to Western academic culture and different communication styles. Although you could say, is there such a thing as Western academic culture? Kevin and I are very aware that in the Netherlands and the UK, there are differences between the academic cultures in those countries, which are culturally speaking quite close together. But the main factor could be that the UK is a native speaking community, of course, and sometimes there might be less non-native speaking awareness. Also, when it comes to communication styles, if you think of how people communicate in the USA and the UK, there are quite big differences there. But anyway, the idea is that learning the mechanics of the language that is separated from developing the ability to gain knowledge, communicate knowledge, If a problem is experienced in how the content is communicated, students are referred to the EAP tutor. So there's this disconnect between the EAP tutor and the content lecturer. The non-native speaking student and the EAP tutor try to solve the problem, so fix the language. But what Kevin and I will be concentrating on is how the content lecturer perhaps could be more involved. And we've been exploring some ways of how this can be done. So far, in my experiences, ways in which this could be done have been the following. So I've taught on SEM courses. SEM means contextualized, embedded, mapped onto the degree program. And the idea is that the EAP tutor takes an informed approach. So the module lead or the content lecturer sends materials, the assessment schedule, and then you can map your EAP course onto that. So hopefully this delivers a more authentic model. So you offer the English that the students actually need in the international classroom. It's still an EAP course though, so it's not part of the content curriculum. I've also had a request to create a 2-hour workshop as the start of a module, focusing on how students can work effectively in multicultural groups. Here again, the idea was that the non-native speaking students might have a problem. There was this, people had seen that there's often this divide in the classroom between native speaking students and non-native speaking students. And they said of the non-native speaking students, they stay in their cultural silos. So, and how could we maybe promote more interaction? Also in Birmingham, we have this great initiative, which is called the Inclusive Educator Network, which offers, amongst others, there's loads of stuff, but one of the things it does is offer workshops for staff who are interested. Myself, I'm offering workshops on decolonizing classroom communication and intercultural interaction. And for that, I build on the training I once developed for our library staff, who came to the BIA and said, the international students don't really engage with our training. I mean, what is going wrong? Is it about how we communicate? Is it something to do with the language? I mean, this is all great stuff. I mean, especially Inclusive Educator Network, which is a really nice initiative. But as this shows, it's still a bit incidental. I mean, it's one way in the sense that the focus is still very much on the non-native speaking student. And all these are one-off things. So it's like people look for the quick fixes. And Kevin and I have been talking about how we could do something that is more ongoing and integrating. So maybe instead of focusing on the student and how the language problem or the intercultural communication problem can be solved, we could focus more on the interaction between the content lecturer and the student. So what actually happens in the international classroom. After all, that's where you want the teaching and learning to take place. And so can we concentrate maybe a bit more on how knowledge and skills in the international classroom, when people are teaching content, can be more successfully communicated? And Kevin will continue talking a bit about EQUIP.
So thank you, Rina. Yeah, so you've been talking about different forms of connection with content lecturers and content. And of course, we know that content lecturers are the people who interpret the syllabus for students, and we also understand as linguists that they do this very much through language and through languaging. Obviously in the Netherlands, what you have is a situation where the majority of content lecturers are not native speakers of English, although they're teaching in English medium instruction classrooms. So that has brought people like myself into contact with them, working with them on pedagogy, intercultural skills, and also on the way language is used. And this led us to look at their CPD and to develop this EQUIP program through the European project. And you can see the URL there if you want to have a longer look. Now today, for our purposes, we're really looking at this module on the role of language over here, the black square on the bottom right. If you go further, Rina, then I can talk a little bit about what we do with the lecturers, the content lecturers, when we talk about the way they're delivering their teaching and the pedagogy. And then we might think about the way that language practitioners and EAP tutors may play a role in this as well, because you can see when you look at the principles developed by Jude Carroll and Betty Lesk as the main authors of these good practice principles, they're fairly generic, and language is running through these principles. And what you can see is that it really needs contextualizing. So, for instance, when your students come into your university as learners, they are in transition, and if you're in the business of delivering EAP, you're very aware of this transition your students are going through. Maybe the content lecturers are not as aware of it in the same way, or not as aware of the role that language plays in that. When we get through to the end of the student's career at your university and they're leaving and they're going out into the world, the globalized world, we hope that the content lecturers are also looking at the language that the students need in order to be successful in terms of employment and so on. So there's a lot of work to do with diversity, and diversity as a positive resource that goes on during their period, their career at the university, from that first principle when they arrive to the sixth principle where they actually graduate and they leave the university. And we believe that this work can be done in partnership, and that's really what we're proposing. If you go to the next slide, please, Rina. We can see the way language is present at various levels in the content courses that are provided in the university. This is an example from Groningen, where we worked with lecturers in the law program, and we looked at the national framework for law in order to help people to unwrap the relevance of language and culture within their professional area. And obviously, one of the areas that you focus on is the fact that society is becoming much more pluralistic and globally oriented. And as a result of that, language is also a feature which becomes more important to be made explicit. On the next slide, you can see some of John Airy's work. And John Airy is somebody who has thought about the way that disciplinary literacy works, because he's actually working in language support, but he is a physicist originally. So he's actually looking at the discipline and the genre and the way language works. But what he's saying in this rather long quote, for which I apologize, is that he's seeing the need not only to look at language from a disciplinary or genre point of view, but also to look at it from the way that it actually works in the classroom to structure the pedagogy, the teaching and learning that is the subject of this conference, of course. So it's to do with language in its societal domain, to do with language as a genre, a disciplinary genre, but also EQUIP really is an opportunity for content lecturers and EAP professionals to come together and look at how language actually works in the classroom. And I'll give you a couple of examples now, Rina, if we could look at the next one. This is obviously to do with the functionality of language. So we get people in the room, in a virtual room or a real room, people with different backgrounds, different perspectives. So you could have students in the room with their content lecturers, with alumni, and you could also have EAP professionals in the room as well. And you could be looking at the way maybe there's an alignment or a lack of alignment between the task and the assessment, or between the lecturing and the way the lecturing is going on and the ability of students to take notes. These are familiar things to you, no doubt. But the point is that the participants in the EQUIP program examine how language structures teaching and learning. And Rina, you have another example of that, I know.
Yeah, so this is a slide I use in the workshop on intercultural communication, and this is for lecturers. And so most people recognize these situations in the left column. The right hand column is usually a bit of an eye-opener. So and it shows that language, it's also part of the intercultural communication and vice versa. So if you think of, I ask a question and nobody bothers to reply in the fifth row, I mean, the assumption can be they can't speak English, which I hear quite often, which is quite sad, but the student might be showing, I understand, I appreciate the teacher's knowledge. If you look at the first row, there's a language thing going on. And the idea is to explore and try and negotiate this. And the EAP tutor can definitely play a role here, because most of us are familiar with these situations.
So it's one thing to know that language is an issue in the classroom, and for instance, silence, of course, is a really good example, the way silence works in the classroom, and how to deal with it. The question is, yeah, indeed, how do you go about dealing with it in a way that you make the way that the languaging is working in the classroom explicit to all the people involved in the process, so to the content lecturers, to the students, your students who are flowing through from EAP courses into their programs, or maybe you're doing in-sessionals where they are moving between a language focus and a content focus. Okay, so this is an example from the EQUIP program where you would have the participants in a workshop sitting in groups, and they would first of all watch a video of these students presenting genetic trees and talking about how genetic defects can be mapped in this way in their topic. And I'm not pretending to know anything about this, but I'll just pretend that I do. And what you do is you first of all look at the video silently without any sound. So we're all good at doing that these days and muting our sound. Firstly, you talk about what's going on in that classroom, what exactly is happening and what's being learned, what are the students getting out of this without the sound. And then, having made notes on that and compared notes, you then look at it with sound. And then you see, of course, the difference that language makes, and also the work that language is doing in order to make the pedagogy work. And you bring the pedagogy and the language together, not to mention the culture as well, Rina, because I know that's something that you're very focused on yourself.
Yeah, and about language, in the library training, I actually spoke Frisian for a while. Everybody was nodding and pretending to understand, and I'm sure they didn't understand a word, because I think I'm the only one in the UK who speaks Frisian.
Oh, my Frisian's not too bad, Rina.
Okay. So the idea is that we enter into dialogue with the content lecturer. So we interact, we collaborate, and together we explore what the students come with, what they need, and hopefully we can build on what students already know, which sometimes is not explored enough. So it's important to think about what are the linguistic and cultural challenges, and for content lecturers maybe to think about, so what is it like to learn in your second or third or fourth language? And students, content lecturers, to facilitate that developing that mutual awareness of what the differences are, and hopefully promote interaction and build rapport. So it's focused on learning to interact, so not separate the language off and let it be fixed by the EAP tutor, but make that part of the process. As Lesk says, so the interaction in the international classroom should be a shared responsibility. So it shouldn't be just a student who needs to be fixed or the EAP tutor's responsibility. We should all partake of that process and be part of that process. So we suggest that EAP tutor and content lecturer collaborate more, so we work together. So our conclusion, I mean, make language acquisition and intercultural competence an integral part of the content curriculum, and this requires, of course, a closer working relationship between the EAP tutor and the content lecturer, so we work in partnership, as it were, and hereby create a community of practice and have that dialogue going and continue to collaborate. So don't separate things off or look for the quick fixes, but make it part of the learning and teaching process.
Yeah, and build beyond. And I think that's what we're doing, Rina, isn't it? What we've been doing, having our discussions over the past couple of years, is thinking beyond our immediacy and trying to work out new angles and new approaches. And I said to you this morning, I think that's really been very much of my own continuing professional development, along with very many other things over the last couple of years. So I think our aim is to try and make this part of the EAP tutors CPD, this looking a little bit beyond the immediacy, and part of that can be really partnering with content lecturers in order to make the language that the students need more explicit, running in a structural way through their program.
Okay. I have a slide with references, and we also have a slide with further reading if you're interested in this topic. So thanks very much, and hopefully there's time for questions now. I think there is.